Invitamos a la congresista Ileana Ros-Lehtinen para que venga al micrófono y dirija unas palabras también.
Muchísimas gracias, un honor y un placer estar aquí con ustedes esta noche. Primero que este instituto tiene mucha fama buena, y muy bueno el programa porque veo que lo último, y lo pusieron lo último, vino de honor, muy inteligente. Así que yo sé que se van a quedar aquí hasta el final. Bueno, pues muchísimas gracias, gracias por todo el apoyo que siempre he recibido de ustedes, especialmente por mi gran amistad con mi amigo, bueno, los dos Carlos, todos los Carlos, siempre que veo a Carlos Alberto Montaner, a todos los Carlos y a Armando, pienso en mi padre y como él los quería a todos ustedes. Gracias por esa amistad, muchas gracias. But thank you so very much for inviting me here today. And we're here today because we care so deeply about the values that bind us together, democracy. And as we look around Latin America, we see democracy under assault everywhere we turn. And because we are rightfully concerned about the sorry state of democracy throughout Latin America. And I would also like to congratulate our wonderful honorees this evening, Viviana and another Carlos, and I haven't had the chance to get to know them as well as I'd like to. So I always have old friends, new friends, and yet to be friends. So you are in that category. It would be my honor. As you know, this is a family that's very well known in Nicaragua, and their business enterprise called by their name, Casa Pellas, and their humanitarian work has been instrumental in helping the people of Nicaragua for many years. I'll be traveling to Nicaragua in a few days, a few weeks, not meeting with Ortega, but meeting with other folks. But the stories of Nicaragua and other countries in the region, such as in my native homeland of Cuba, are what binds us together. They continue, many of us, to be the voice, welcome, be the voice for the people living under repressive regimes. Así que eso es parte de la misión de Armando Valladares cuando fue nuestro embajador en las Naciones Unidas, en ese Consejo de Derechos Humanos que cada día se pone peor. Armando, mira que era bien mala cuando tú estuviste, pero ahora tienen, I think there's Saudi Arabia and China and Cuba, and you name it, all of the thugs are in that Human Rights Council. But as we consider this issue of human rights violations and democracy in the region, we can't help but notice the complete absence of all of those values, the complete absence of human rights and separation of powers and political parties and a free press, all of those that are hallmarks of a democracy, all of those are lacking in my native homeland in Cuba since Fidel Castro came to power more than 50 years ago. And Armando, how many years were you in jail in Cuba?
Only 22.
Only 22. And Jim Kaysen was, I think, the best chief of the U.S. interest section that we have ever had. So thank you, Jim Kaysen, for being a real leader for freedom. And to this day, we read these stories, and many of the citizens of the world, they shrug their shoulders. It's like, who cares what happens there? Yeah, you know, what's happening in Beyonce in the elevator. That's of great importance. But in the face of widespread condemnation and the abuses that are taking place of international standards and human rights that are violently violated each and every day, this brutal dictatorship in that small island of Cuba continues to trample on those who would even dare to speak on behalf of freedom and democracy and human rights, things that we take so lightly here, not us here, because in this room, I know no one takes those lightly, but maybe outside in the streets, people who don't quite understand or don't have as great of appreciation as we have of how valuable those concepts are and how real they are and how much we lament and fight to get them back when we lose them. But there are no reforms in my native homeland of Cuba. But every day when I'm in D.C., my colleagues talk about these cosmetic reforms. Oh, I read this story, and it says that you can now buy a house and you can sell your car. And we have been hearing about these reforms now for many a year. I think they passed that law, such as it is, what law? Every 5 years or so. And then the gullible press that is stationed there in Havana, because the only press that will be credentialed in Havana is if you swallow their tail. And I don't know if they believe it or not, but they know they have to report it. And they'll talk about their cute little antique cars and the crumbling buildings, and always in this quaint and iconic and picturesque. It's all a National Geographic slideshow. And I value my friendship with my colleague Marco Rubio, and he always tells his colleagues in the Senate, Cuba is not a zoo. It's not something that you go and you see the exhibits. Oh, isn't that cute? Isn't that cute? But it's failed propaganda by the Cuban regime. All of us know that. They talk about these reforms. Nothing ever changes. This year, for example, the regime has arrested thousands of human rights and democracy advocates. It was a record year this past year, because now the regime does catch and release programs. They detain you, they let you go, and it's a way to intimidate everyone on the island. And it's willing to use violence against anyone who dares to speak up, even the peaceful ladies in white. All of us know las damas de blanco. Every week they face brutal treatment, and they know this. They know that they will be arrested. They know that they will be pulled by their hairs across the pavement, and they will be rounded up, arrested by Castro's security agents. And what is it that they do? They march with a flower in their hand and a photograph of their loved one who has been arrested, and they silently walk to mass. And that little silent protest is such a threat to the authoritarian Marxist regime that they beat them up every week, and yet they go out there. And there's so many more like them. Pro-democracy advocates, we in this room know who they are. Jorge Luis Garcia Antunes, what a brave man who has spent already more than 17 years in prison. When he was released, kept being active, been on a hunger strike in solidarity with what is going on in Venezuela, and keeps pushing the regime. And his phrase, as you know, ni me callo, ni me voy. And what a brave man. And Berta Soler, one of the leaders of Las Damas de Blanco, Sonia Garro. It's not a name that people know as much, but Sonia has been detained, meaning she's been arrested for many a year, has still awaiting charges to be pressed against her. And they live with all of these others who aren't in jail. They live with the constant threat that they could be in jail because of their peaceful activism. And this tragic situation that we see in Cuba, that we have all lived through, and we have relatives who have lived through this for far too long, well, it's now becoming increasingly evident that it is the reality of the people of Venezuela. Venezuelans have had their rights trampled upon since Chavez came to power. But today, under Nicolás Maduro, it's not only the rights that are being trampled upon, but their own people, their own bodies are being trampled upon. Students and freedom-loving people are being beaten, imprisoned, tortured, murdered by security officials. And these are part of a pervasive pattern of abuse by security forces, which repeatedly goes unpunished, thanks to the training and support of the Cuban security forces, the Cuban military, Cuban intelligence officials who are penetrating Venezuela every day. And unfortunately, these actions are the outflow of the true character of a regime that persecutes its political opponents as if they were enemies of the state, and they are being treated as enemies of the state. People like Maria Corina Machado, who was forcibly stripped of her legislative seat, Leopoldo Lopez, who languishes in a military base outside Caracas and is not receiving the family members and visits as he should. And because of these blatant acts of just abuse of power, and because of the lack of action from the Obama administration, we have seen, what have we seen? Silence. We have heard silence from the regional leaders throughout Latin America, a complete indifference to what is going on in Venezuela, because they're in Maduro's pockets because of oil exports. And because of that, I have introduced a bill, along with my colleagues, bipartisan bill with Mario, with Joe, with Debbie Wasserman Schultz, with Ted Deutsch, Alcee Hastings. All of our folks are joining in, and Marco and Bob Menendez have a similar bill in the Senate to hold accountable the human rights violators in Venezuela. And it's like the bare minimum, es lo más chiquitico que uno puede hacer. Y la oposición del Departamento de Estado es una cosa increíble. Nuestro propio Departamento de Estado, que está llamando a los colegas para decir no voten por este proyecto. Y Roberta Jacobson, que es la asistente, la secretaria de Estado de los Asuntos de nuestro hemisferio, hasta falsificó evidencia en el Senado. Dijo que grupos de la oposición estaban en contra de nuestro proyecto de ley. Y cuando Marco Rubio la cuestionó, tuvo que admitir que eso no era la verdad, era una falsedad. Ella le estaba diciendo una mentira a nuestros colegas para parar este proyecto, que es lo mínimo que se puede hacer. Yo hasta tengo pena cuando le explico a los venezolanos aquí en el exilio lo que hace el proyecto de ley, porque ellos piensan que hace por la oposición debe ser mucho más grande. Yo digo, no, es una cosita, un granito. Y con eso el Departamento de Estado dice que no debemos pasar el proyecto porque estamos en una etapa delicada de proceso de paz. Es una cosa increíble. Estoy contenta que lo pudimos pasar en nuestro Comité de Relaciones Exteriores. Ojalá que esté pronto en el Pleno de la Cámara, que lo podamos pasar, que lo pueda pasar Marco, que lo pase Bob Menéndez, que el presidente lo firme para poner por lo menos unas restricciones mínimas a estos violadores de derechos humanos en Venezuela. Que Dios lo quiera. Because we cannot wait for more students to be killed to take action. We can't excuse the abuse against democratic institutions. And that's exactly what we're seeing in Nicaragua. Lo vemos en Ecuador, lo vemos en Argentina, lo vemos en Bolivia, where autocratic leaders have repeatedly mocked democratic principles to advance their own leftist agenda and in order to silence the opposition. In Bolivia and Argentina, for example, the space of newspapers such as Página 7 and Clarín have been restricted because these outlets have been critical of the government. And in Ecuador, Correa, who recently called the independent press the greatest enemy of his political goals, has waged a war on free press through numerous devastating lawsuits and a communications law that severely restricts the operating space for the country's independent media outlets. And Correa, along with Nicaragua's Ortega, have shown a complete disregard for the rule of law, using the control of the legislature and judiciaries to push through constitutional measures to remove term limits so they can continue to be reelected indefinitely. And once in power, these rogue leaders change the rules of the game by manipulating the legislature, by stacking electoral councils, by stacking the courts in their favor to hold on to power at any cost. They intimidate opponents through abusing state institutions, blatantly disregard and violate their own constitution, and they charge political opponents with financial crimes, with drug trafficking charges. They will fabricate any kind of charge for against political opponents. And so I and many of my colleagues in Congress believe that this administration has not made it a priority to defend democratic principles in the hemisphere. So we are ready to act in the case of Venezuela to defend the precious freedoms that are continually threatened. And that's why I need your help to educate the media and Washington about the atrocities that are being committed daily in our own hemisphere and how democracy is under assault in Latin America. And it is up to us to wake up, smell the coffee, and act on behalf of freedom, democracy, and human rights, because those are American values. Muchísimas gracias y muy agradecida. Thank you.